She opened the door and saved a life, but in doing so, she might have destroyed her own. In 1875 Texas, one woman's act of compassion for a wounded Comanche warrior sparks a wave of betrayal, danger, and unexpected transformation. What happened? After that knock on the door changed not just her future, but the course of many others. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The summer of 1875 had been particularly harsh in the small settlement of Willow Creek, Texas. 3 months without rain had parched the land, leaving the townsfolk on edge as they struggled to maintain their livelihoods. For Sarah Montgomery, a 30-year-old widow who had lost her husband in the Civil War, life was a constant battle of endurance. Sarah lived on the outskirts of town in a modest cabin that doubled as an infirmary. Though she had no formal medical training, she had learned the healing arts from her mother and had become the town's unofficial nurse. The locals respected her skills but maintained a careful distance from her, whispering about the peculiar ways of a woman who lived alone and spent her days gathering herbs and tending to the sick. The morning air was thick with dust as Sarah collected water from the stream behind her property. The sound of distant hoofbeats made her pause. Riders at this early hour usually meant trouble. She quickly retreated to her cabin, peering through the window as 5 men from town galloped past, rifles in hand. Comanche raiders spotted near Miller's Creek. One shouted to her as they passed, "Lock your doors, Mrs. Montgomery." Sarah's heart raced. The tenuous peace between settlers and the Comanche had been fragile at best. Reports of raids had increased as both sides fought over dwindling resources in the drought-stricken territory. That night, as a summer storm finally broke the heat, Sarah was awakened by a sound at her door. Lightning illuminated the room as she reached for the rifle her husband had left her. The pounding grew more insistent. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer came, only more pounding, weaker now. Sarah lit a lantern and cautiously approached the door. When she opened it, a man collapsed at her feet. In the lamplight, she could see the distinctive features of a Comanche warrior, his sides soaked with blood. Her medical instincts took over. The man was young, perhaps in his 20s, with a gunshot wound that had torn through his abdomen. He would die without help. "I must be losing my mind," she muttered as she dragged him inside and barred the door. For hours, Sarah worked to remove the bullet and stop the bleeding. The warrior drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words she couldn't understand. By morning, his fever had broken, and Sarah knew he would survive. What she didn't know was that Tom Wilson, the town's most notorious gossip, had been passing by and had glimpsed through her window. By midday, the entire town knew that Sarah Montgomery was harboring a Comanche warrior. Sheriff James Parker arrived at her door by noon, accompanied by several armed men. "Sarah, open up," he called, his voice grave. "We know what you're hiding in there." Sarah opened the door but blocked the entrance. "He's wounded, James, barely alive." "He's the enemy," the sheriff replied, his expression hardening. "Those savages killed the Miller boy last month. Hand him over." "I won't let you lynch a defenseless man," Sarah said, standing her ground. "He hasn't harmed anyone here." The sheriff's face reddened. "You're choosing one of them over your own people? After what they've done?" "I'm choosing what's right," Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly. "If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, so be it." The standoff lasted several tense moments before the sheriff finally spoke. "You have until tomorrow. Either he's gone, or we'll remove him ourselves." He turned to the gathered crowd. "Anyone caught helping Mrs. Montgomery will be considered an accomplice." As they departed, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The Comanche warrior watched her with dark, inscrutable eyes. "Do you understand me?" she asked, Approaching him cautiously. To her surprise, he nodded. "My name is Tashunka," he said in halting English. "Why you help me?" Sarah sat down beside the pallet where he lay. "Because you needed help. That's reason enough." Tashunka studied her face. "Your people will harm you for this." "Probably," Sarah admitted. "But I couldn't let you die on my doorstep." As night fell, Sarah knew she had to make a decision. Keeping Tashunka here would put both their lives at risk, but he was still too weak to travel far. She was considering her options when a soft knock came at her back door. Sarah grabbed her rifle again, but was relieved to see it was only Eliza Johnson, the wife of the town's blacksmith and one of the few people Sarah considered a friend. "I brought you some food," Eliza whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "And news. The men are getting drunk at the saloon, talking about coming here at dawn." "Thank you, Eliza," Sarah said, taking the basket. "You shouldn't be here. If they find out, you've helped too many of us for me to abandon you now," Eliza replied firmly. "My Jacob says there's an abandoned trapper's cabin about 5 miles west, near the fork in the river. No one goes there anymore." As Eliza slipped away into the darkness, Sarah knew what she had to do. She would have to leave the home she'd built and the community that had once accepted her, all for a stranger from a people she had been taught to fear. But as she looked at Tashunka, something told her this decision would change everything she thought she knew about courage, loyalty, and the invisible boundaries that divided people from one another. The night enveloped Sarah and Tashunka as they made their way through the dense underbrush toward the abandoned trapper's cabin. Sarah led her old mare, Luna, who carried their meager supplies and occasionally supported Tashunka when his strength faltered. The Comanche warrior moved with surprising resilience despite his wound, but Sarah could see the pain etched across his face with each step. "We need to rest," she insisted after they had traveled for over an hour. Tashunka shook his head. "Your people will come at first light. We must be far away." "You'll reopen your wound," Sarah argued, but Tashunka's determined expression silenced her protests. The journey continued in tense silence, broken only by the sounds of nocturnal creatures and the distant rumble of thunder. The storm that had passed the previous night threatened to return, adding urgency to their pace. When they finally reached the cabin, Sarah was dismayed by its condition. The roof had partially collapsed, and the door hung precariously from a single hinge. But it offered shelter and, more importantly, distance from Willow Creek. "It's not much," Sarah said apologetically as she helped Tashunka inside. "It is good," he replied simply, lowering himself onto the dusty floor. Sarah busied herself making the space habitable, sweeping away debris and setting up a small fire in the stone hearth. As she worked, she stole glances at her companion, wondering about the man whose life had become inexplicably intertwined with hers. "Why were you alone?" she finally asked as she changed his bandages. "Comanche warriors usually travel in groups." Tashunka's eyes met hers, measuring how much to reveal. "I was returning from a peace talk with the army at Fort Davis. My brother, our war chief, sent me to speak for our band." "Peace talks?" Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "The newspaper says the Comanche refused to negotiate." A bitter smile crossed Tashunka's face. "Your newspapers say many things. My people are dying. The buffalo are gone. The drought kills our crops. We cannot feed our children with pride." The raw honesty in his voice struck Sarah deeply. She had never considered the struggle of the Comanche from their perspective. The newspapers painted them as bloodthirsty savages, incapable of civilization or compromise. "What happened at Fort Davis?" she asked softly. "I spoke with a colonel who promised food and medicine if we moved to the reservation in Oklahoma Territory. When I left, men followed me. They wore no uniforms." His hand touched the bandaged wound. "They said no peace with Red Devils." Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Why?" Tashunka's dark eyes probed hers. You did not shoot me. Because it's wrong, she replied. And because I know what it's like to be judged for something you can't change. As night deepened, Sarah shared her own story. How she had come to Texas from Pennsylvania with her husband before the war. How his death had left her alone in a community that valued women primarily as wives and mothers, and how her independence had always made others uncomfortable. They tolerated me because they needed my healing skills, she explained. But I was never truly one of them. Tashunka listened intently. Your medicine is strong. You have a healer's spirit. My mother taught me, Sarah said, a sad smile crossing her face. She learned from a Shawnee woman back in Pennsylvania. Their conversation continued through the night, bridging cultural divides with shared human experiences. Sarah learned that Tashunka had a wife and young son waiting for him, and that before the wars and reservation policies, he had been known for his skill in horse breeding rather than fighting by dawn. A tentative trust had formed between them. Sarah checked his wound and was pleased to find no signs of infection. The bullet missed your vital organs, she told him. With rest and proper care, you should heal completely. Then I must return to my people soon, Tashunka replied. They will think me dead otherwise. Sarah felt an unexpected pang at the thought of his departure. Where will you go? The army is looking for Comanche all across the territory. There is a hidden camp in the Palo Duro Canyon, he said after a moment's hesitation. What remains of my band is gathered there with others who refused the reservation. The revelation worried Sarah. If Tashunka was captured and revealed the location under duress, it could lead to disaster for his people. Their discussion was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Sarah's heart raced as she peered through a crack in the cabin wall. 3 riders approached, moving slowly as they scanned the ground. They're tracking us, she whispered, fear gripping her throat. Tashunka moved with surprising agility, gathering their few belongings. We must go, now. Can't travel like this, Sarah protested. Your wound will not matter if we are caught, he finished grimly. Sarah knew he was right. She quickly doused the fire and helped Tashunka onto Luna's back. They slipped out the back of the cabin and into the dense woods beyond, just as the riders approached the clearing. Through the trees, Sarah recognized Sheriff Parker among the men. The realization that he had personally joined the search party chilled her. This was no longer about returning a Comanche warrior to the army. This had become personal. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, Sarah understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She was now a fugitive alongside Tashunka, bound by a decision that had stripped away her former life. Yet as she glanced at the wounded warrior who sat tall despite his pain, she felt no regret. For the first time in years, her actions aligned perfectly with her conscience, regardless of the cost. We will find a way, she said, more to herself than to Tashunka. Somehow we'll find a way through this. The dense pine forest gradually gave way to rugged scrubland as Sarah and Tashunka pushed westward. 3 days had passed since their narrow escape from the trapper's cabin. 3 days of cautious travel, hiding during daylight hours and moving under the cover of darkness. Tashunka's condition had improved remarkably, though Sarah noticed he still favored his wounded side. How much farther to Palo Duro Canyon? Sarah asked as they rested in the shade of a rocky outcrop. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, making travel impossible until evening. 2 days, maybe 3, Tashunka replied, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. The land grows more difficult before we reach it. Sarah nodded, conserving her water as she took a small sip from her canteen. Their supplies were dwindling dangerously low. The drought had dried up many of the streams they had counted on for replenishment. There is a trading post near here, Tashunka said, noting her concern. Run by a man not like others. He trades with all people, does not care about the color of skin. Is it safe? Sarah asked hesitantly. Safer than dying of thirst, Tashunka replied with a hint of dry humor that had emerged during their journey. By sunset, they approached the trading post, a weathered wooden building nestled against a hillside. A single lantern glowed in the window, its light a beacon in the gathering darkness. Sarah felt exposed as they approached, her nerves jangling with each step. Wait here, she told Tashunka, who concealed himself behind a stand of juniper trees. If something happens, don't try to help me. Make your way to your people. Before he could protest, she straightened her travel-worn dress and walked toward the post. The door creaked as she entered, drawing the attention of an elderly man with a wild gray beard and piercing blue eyes. Don't get many visitors these days, he said, setting aside the book he'd been reading. Especially not lone women. I need supplies, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Water, jerky, and medical supplies if you have them. The man studied her carefully. You're running from something. Or someone. Sarah tensed, her hand moving subtly toward the knife hidden in her pocket. The old man chuckled. Relax, miss. Ain't my business why folks come through here. Name's Jeremiah Wilson. Been trading in this territory for 30 years. Seen all kinds pass through. Sarah hesitated before responding. I'm Sarah. Just Sarah? Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. Just Sarah is all you need to know, she replied firmly. Jeremiah nodded appreciatively. Fair enough. Now about those supplies. As Sarah gathered what they needed, Jeremiah moved to the window, gazing out into the darkness. Your Comanche friend might as well come in. Nights get cold out there. Sarah froze. I don't know what you're talking about. I've lived alongside the Comanche and Kiowa for decades, Jeremiah said calmly. I know how they move, how they hide. Tell him he's welcome, but he should leave that knife outside. Astonished, Sarah signaled to Tashunka, who cautiously entered the trading post minutes later. Jeremiah offered them hot coffee and a place by the stove, asking no questions about their circumstances, but sharing news that chilled them both. Armies? Been through here twice this week, he told them. Looking for a Comanche they say escaped custody. And a white woman they're calling a sympathizer, offering a reward for information. What did you tell them? Sarah asked, her throat tight. Told them I hadn't seen hide nor hair of either, Jeremiah replied. Which was true at the time. What happens now is between us. As the night deepened, Jeremiah revealed that he had married a Kiowa woman decades ago, living with her people until her death 5 years earlier. His position between worlds had given him a unique perspective on the conflict that ravaged the territory. Most folks on both sides just want to live in peace, he observed. It's the ones hungry for land or power that keep the bloodshed going. In the morning, rested and resupplied, Sarah and Tashunka prepared to depart. Jeremiah provided them with a crude map showing hidden water sources and army patrols to avoid. There's a place marked where canyon walls rise like cathedrals, he told Tashunka. Tell Black Hawk that walks between sends his respects. Tashunka's eyes widened in recognition of the name. You know our chief? Traded with him when he was just a boy, Jeremiah confirmed. Before all this madness. As they left the trading post, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jeremiah had reminded her that humanity could transcend the artificial boundaries of race and allegiance. Their journey continued across increasingly barren landscape. Tashunka shared stories of his people, their traditions, beliefs, and the desperate struggle to maintain their way of life against overwhelming forces. Sarah listened, absorbing a perspective that contradicted everything she had been taught about the savage Comanche. On the 6th day since leaving Willow Creek, disaster struck. As they crossed an exposed plateau, the distant thunder of hoofbeats alerted them to approaching riders. With nowhere to hide, they urged Luna forward, racing toward a ravine that promised concealment. The pursuing riders gained ground quickly. 4 men, including one Sarah recognized with dread as Tom Wilson from Willow Creek. They had been tracked far beyond what she had imagined possible. "Go," Tashunka urged as they reached the ravine. "I will lead them away." "No," Sarah protested. "We stay together." But Tashunka had already slipped from Luna's back, moving with the fluid grace of a recovered warrior. "They want me more than you. Perhaps you can still return to your life." Before Sarah could argue further, Tashunka pressed something into her. "Hand a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork." "For protection," he said softly. "Remember what I have taught you about my people. Tell others the truth of what you have seen." With that, he darted away, deliberately leaving tracks as he headed east while Sarah continued north toward the canyon. The strategy worked. Moments later, she heard the riders change direction. Following Tashunka's trail, Sarah pressed forward alone, tears streaming down her face as guilt and fear battled within her. Had she led Tashunka to his death? Would she ever know what happened to him? As night fell, she made camp in a sheltered alcove, clutching the beaded pouch as if it could somehow connect her to Tashunka. Inside, she found a small carved wooden horse's symbol. She remembered him telling her of freedom and strength to his people. That night, as the stars wheeled overhead, Sarah made a decision. She would continue to the canyon and deliver Tashunka's message to his people. It was the only way to honor what they had shared, a brief but profound connection that had forever altered her understanding of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and compassion. The imposing walls of Palo Duro Canyon rose before Sarah like nature's fortress, painted in bands of red, yellow, and white stone. After 8 grueling days of travel, she had finally reached her destination, guided by Jeremir's map and the landmarks Tashunka had described. Luna was exhausted, her once sturdy frame now gaunt from the difficult journey. Sarah approached cautiously, knowing that Comanche scouts would be watching long before she could see them. She had rehearsed the words Tashunka had taught her, a simple greeting in the Comanche language that might prevent her from being shot on sight. When the scouts finally emerged from the landscape, as if born from the earth itself, Sarah raised her hand slowly and spoke the phrase. The warriors exchanged glances, clearly surprised to hear their language from a white woman's lips. "I bring news of Tashunka," she added in English, hoping they would understand. "And a message from Walks Between." These names produced an immediate reaction. After a brief consultation, the warriors escorted her down a hidden trail into the canyon depths. Sarah felt both fear and wonder as they descended into a world few white people had ever seen. Comanche camp was smaller than she had imagined, perhaps. 30 lodges arranged in a semicircle against the canyon wall. Women paused in their work to stare as Sarah was led through the camp. Children darted behind their mothers, peeking curiously at the strange visitor. At the center of the camp, a tall, commanding figure awaited them. Black Hawk, the chief, regarded Sarah with penetrating eyes that reminded her intensely of Tashunka. "You speak of my brother," he said in heavily accented English. "Where is he?" Sarah's heart sank at the confirmation of their relationship. "He was wounded near Willow Creek. I tended his injuries and helped him escape, but we were pursued. 4 days ago, he led the hunters away so I could reach you with his message." The chief's expression remained impassive, but Sarah noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped his staff. "What message?" "He wanted you to know the peace talks at Fort Davis were a deception," Sarah explained. "He was ambushed after leaving the fort by men who weren't soldiers, but acted with the army's knowledge." Black Hawk nodded grimly. "This we suspected. What of the message from Walks Between?" Sarah repeated Jeremir's words and presented the beaded pouch Tashunka had given her. Black Hawk examined it, recognition softening his stern features momentarily. "My brother made this for his son," he said quietly. "He would not part with it unless he believed he might not return." The implications of his words hung heavily in the air. Sarah felt tears threatening but forced them back. "I don't believe Tashunka is dead," she said with more conviction than she felt. "He is strong and clever. He led the trackers away deliberately." An elderly woman had approached during their conversation. She spoke rapidly to Black Hawk in Comanche, gesturing occasionally toward Sarah. "Our medicine woman says you have a healer's hands," Black Hawk translated. "She asks why you would risk your life for one of our people." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Because healing is my calling, and because your brother showed me the truth that exists beyond the stories we are told about each other." Her response seemed to satisfy the medicine woman, who nodded approvingly. Black Hawk studied Sarah for a long moment before speaking again. "You will stay with us tonight. Tomorrow we will discuss what is to be done." Sarah was led to a small lodge where she could rest. The medicine woman, whose name she learned was Singing Bird, brought her food and examined Luna's condition, applying a salve to the mare's worn hooves. As darkness fell over the canyon, Sarah sat outside her lodge, watching the Comanche go about their evening rituals. Despite their precarious situation, hunted by the army, struggling against drought and displacement, there was a dignity and cohesion to their community that moved her deeply. "They say you saved my father." Sarah turned to find a boy of about 10 standing nearby, his features a younger version of Tashunka's. "You speak English very well," she said, surprised. "My father taught me," the boy replied, sitting cross-legged beside her. "He said knowing the white man's tongue might save my life someday." "Your father is very wise," Sarah said gently. "And yes, I tried to help him when he was wounded. Will he come back?" The boy's question held the vulnerable hope of childhood, piercing Sarah's heart. "I believe he will try with all his strength," she answered honestly. Their conversation was interrupted by sudden commotion at the camp's edge. Warriors gathered, weapons ready, as a small group approached from the canyon entrance. Sarah stood, straining to see through the gathering darkness, and then, like an apparition from her prayers, Tashunka appeared among them, supported by 2 warriors. He was battered and exhausted, but unmistakably alive. Sarah's legs carried her forward before she could think. The warriors parted as Tashunka saw her, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "You made it," he said simply when they stood before each other. "As did you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Later, after Tashunka had been reunited with his son and brother, he told his story. He had led the pursuers into a box canyon where Kiowa allies were camped, resulting in the capture of the men who had hunted them. From the captives, they had learned that the army was planning a major campaign against the remaining free bands in the territory. "We must leave these lands soon," Black Hawk announced to the gathered tribe. "The soldiers will find this place eventually." The Council of Elders debated long into the night. Some argued for fighting to the last warrior, others for attempting to reach the Llano Estacado where the army would struggle to follow. Tashunka advocated for seeking alliance with other tribes who had managed to avoid the reservations. Through it all, Sarah sat quietly, an outsider witnessing the death throes of a way of life. When dawn approached and the council finally dispersed, Tashunka found her by the dying fire. "You should return to your people," he said gently. "What comes next is not your battle." Sarah looked up at the man who had transformed her understanding of the world. "I have no people to return to," she replied. "Willow Creek is close to me now. Then what will you do?" Tashunka asked. Sarah considered the question that had haunted her throughout their journey. "There are settlements to the west where people care less about where you came from than what you can contribute. Jeremiah mentioned a place called Tucson that needs healers." Tashunka nodded thoughtfully. "A new beginning. For all of us, perhaps," Sarah said. "Your son speaks excellent English. There may be a place where your knowledge and skills are valued rather than feared." A sad smile crossed Tashunka's face. "Perhaps, but first, I must help my people through." This darkness. As the camp stirred to life around them, Sarah understood that their paths would soon diverge. Yet something profound had been forged between them, a bridge, across worlds that neither had believed possible. Before Sarah departed the canyon 3 days later, supplied and guided by Comanche warriors who would ensure her safe passage west, Tashunka presented her with a new gift, a small medicine bag filled with healing herbs and adorned with a single eagle feather. "For protection on your journey," he said, echoing his words from days earlier. "And to remember that bridges can be built even in times of war." Sarah touched the feather gently. "I will tell your story," she promised. "The true story, not the one printed in newspapers or taught to children." As she rode away from Palo Duro Canyon, Sarah carried with her more than memories. She carried the understanding that humanity's greatest strength lay not in conquest, but in connection, in the courage to see beyond boundaries and recognize the shared spirit that united all people. Regardless of the color of their skin or the language of their prayers. In the years that followed, Sarah would fulfill her promise, becoming known throughout the Arizona Territory not only for her healing skills, but for her uncommon insights into the indigenous cultures that most settlers viewed with fear and suspicion. And though she never saw Tashunka again, his influence shaped the remainder of her life, a life dedicated to building bridges rather than walls in a land torn by conflict and misunderstanding.